Good evening, everyone. Hope you are doing well this evening. Hope you're out there listening and looking forward to doing another lesson from Clarksville Highway Church of Christ tonight. We are discussing, still in this series called Incredible Women of the Bible, and really excited about this series and what it's going to, what it's doing. We have probably about three or four more lessons left in this. We will talk about Eunice and Lois next week. The week after that, we will talk about Phoebe and whether she should be called, well, just what Phoebe was. She's referred to in Romans chapter 16. So we'll talk about Phoebe the week after that. And then the following week, the last week we'll do this series, it'll be Junia. And that'll be more of a textual study about trying to figure out exactly who Junior was and how she was serving in the church. So hope you can join for each one of those. So that'll be three more. So in 3 weeks, we will be finishing this series up about the end of October, as I think is when we'll finish this. And then the first Wednesday in November, we'll start to do something new. But anyway, we're going to finish up, not finish up the series, but we're going to talk about Lydia tonight as we talk through incredible women of the Bible. So if you're looking to find Lydia in the New Testament, you will find her in Acts chapter 16. If you start reading Acts chapter 16, about verse 11, and then through the end of that chapter, I think probably all the way through the end of that chapter, really, to get to the very end. She's mentioned in the very last verse of Acts chapter 16. So it's not much in the text about Lydia, really. I mean, she is not, she's not really talked about that much. But she's I think she's a really great study of an incredible woman in the Bible. So if you're out there watching on Facebook, you have questions, put them in the comment box, and I'll see those. If you're on the live stream on the website, there is a chat box there. You can throw something in the chat box. I'll try to monitor that, try to make sure I get your questions. If you have a question and you know my phone number while I'm doing this, you can send me a text. If that doesn't work, I'll try to watch that as well. So with all of those ways to contact me, maybe if you have a question, you can send a question. So Lydia lives in Philippi, and if you look at this map that we have right here, Philippi is up here in this top, the top left corner. Right up here at the top, it's part of Macedonia. This would be during Paul's second missionary journey. If you just want to follow this, the laser pointer there, he goes to down this path. So he goes to Troas, and then he crosses over into Philippi, and we'll get into that just a little bit more as we go through this study. But I just kind of wanted to see where we were on the map. Paul is in Philippi, which is where he is going to meet Lydia. So Philippi is an interesting town. In fact, Philippi had been called the Little Rome. Philippi, I may give you more history than you want, but just kind of give you an idea of what Philippi was like, because it gives a pretty good perspective on what's happening in the text. Way back 356 BC, it's captured by Philip II, who is Alexander the Great's father. And it's originally was named the Crinides, which means spring, and it's a city. It was really important because there was a lot of gold ore in that region. So Philip needed that gold so he could outfit his army. And so as he outfitted his army, he would need more and more money to do that, obviously. So he captured that, and then the region became a Roman province in about 168 BC, which is way before the birth of Christ, before the things that we're looking at. And then maybe some names that you've heard if you read Shakespeare: Brutus and Cassius, who they advocated this a republican form of government. And they fought Antony and Octavian, who advocated for an imperial form of government. And in that first battle, Antony and Octavian defeated, and so they left some of their, some of their victorious veterans. They just left there, and they established this government reform. And in 31 BC, after the Battle of Actium, Octavian defeats Antony. And when he does that, all of Antony's supporters are deposed and exiled to Philippi. So when that happens in 31 BC, then Philippi actually becomes a Roman colony. So all of the townspeople in Philippi are declared to be citizens of Rome. And that's a really big deal. So they speak Latin. They try to dress in the latest Roman fashion. They took great pride in being Romans. And there are some things that went along with that. For example, they were free from scourging. They were free from rest, except in like really, really rare occasions. A veteran, this would be an interesting thing. Maybe America should look at this. But each veteran received from the empire a grant of land, and they didn't have to pay taxes. They didn't have to pay poll taxes or land taxes. They had the right to buy and sell property. They had all of the protection and all of the rights of Roman law, and they even had special local government leaders who would take care of their legal matters. And they were just kind of special from a lot of the other cities. So for that reason, Philippi was called a little Rome. And I think that plays into understanding a little bit about what's happening in Philippi in Acts chapter 16. Paul is in Philippi. It's probably around AD 49, AD 50. There's some things going on with the Roman government that I think impacts what you read about in Acts chapter 16. So, got any questions about that? Shoot me a message, but hopefully that explained that a little bit. So Claudius, who is the emperor, he reigned from AD 51 to AD 54. And Claudius, Suetonius, who's a Roman historian, he reports some of his dealings in that Eastern Roman Empire with Greece and Macedonia and that area. But in Claudius 25, Suetonius refers to this edict by Claudius that it said, since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, he expelled them from Rome. Now, we see that later. When we saw it last week, we talked about Priscilla and Aquila, because that is the reason that they left Rome and Paul met with them in Corinth, and later they went to Ephesus. But at the time that Paul is in Philippi is probably the time, around that time, that this edict is being given to expel the Christians from the Jews, not the Christians, but the Jews from Rome. So Philippi being little Rome and being really tied together with what's happening in Rome and wanting to be so much like Rome, except on a smaller scale, they probably would have already heard about that, and it already had an impact on what's going to happen in Acts chapter 16. So Paul is on his, I'm just recap this really quick. Paul's on his second missionary journey. He has gone over and he's the man from Macedonia. We'll talk about that in just a second. So he leaves there and he goes into Philippi. And so when he gets into Philippi, if you look in Acts chapter 16, let me see if I can get a Bible up here for you. Acts chapter 16 in verse 6. Paul and his companions traveled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, and having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. And when they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. So they passed by Mysia and went down to Troas, and during the night Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him, come over to Macedonia and help us. And Paul, after seeing the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. So it's right after those verses, they sail to Troas, they put out to sea, they Samothrace, they go to Neapolis, and from there they travel to Philippi, which is a Roman colony and the leading city of that district of Macedonia, which you see here in Acts chapter 16, verse 12. And it says that they stayed there several days. So Paul's custom when he goes to a city is that he would go to the synagogue. And he would go to the synagogue and he would reason with the Jews there about Jesus. But when you get to Philippi, he doesn't do that. Let's go back to the text really quick. Well, wrong Bible program. So on the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river where we expected to find a place of prayer, and we sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. So there's a couple of things that's going on in Philippi that impacts what Paul is able to do. One, they go outside the city gate to worship, to find a place of prayer. Now, I don't know if they were going outside the city gate because Claudius had expelled the Jews from Rome. I wondered if maybe they had expelled them from Philippi, even though the text doesn't say that. For whatever reason, they're going outside the city gate. If there is a spot that was small enough that did not have a synagogue, it would not have been unusual for there to be a meeting place outside the city gate, and preferably close to a river because of ceremonial washings. And if there weren't, according to the Talmud, there needed to be 10 Jewish men in a city for there to be a synagogue. And for whatever reason, I guess maybe there weren't 10 Jewish men in Philippi so that there could be a synagogue. So his normal custom of going to the synagogue wasn't available, so he goes to outside the city gate to the river where they expected to find a place of prayer, and they meet these women who have met there, and that's where Paul meets Lydia. So maybe they followed Claudius's example and banished the Jews from Philippi. It's interesting, and we'll see this a little bit in the text. When Paul is arrested, the charge is that they are accused of they're accused of being men. They're Jews, and they're throwing our city into an uproar by advocating customs unlawful for the Romans to accept or to practice. And that almost seems in the text like it comes out of left field, but it doesn't. That's exactly what is going on in Rome, and exactly what happens when Claudius decides to expel the Jews from Rome. So that's kind of how the gospel gets to Philippi, and one of those listening, it says in the text, it says, one of those listening was a woman named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira, who is a worshiper of God, and the Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. So the first thing I want to say about Lydia is that Lydia was a successful businesswoman. Now, if you look at this map, go to the next slide. If you look at this map, this is Philippi, and Thyatira is here. And you might recognize the name Thyatira just because of the book of Revelation. But so you've got Thyatira, and then it's, you know, as the crow flies, as I measure that on a map, it's probably about 250 miles. If you had to travel by road and then by boat, I mean, maybe 300 miles, 325 miles. That's just a guess. But she's from Thyatira, but she is living in Philippi, which, according to some other inscriptions that were found, might not have been that unusual. Sorry, I went to the wrong slide. Might not have been that unusual. There is an inscription that was found in Philippi about a man who was one of the benefactors of the city, and he was also from Thyatira, and he was also a dealer in purple and purple dye. So maybe there were several people in Philippi who had traveled from Thyatira. Purple dye and purple clothing was really, really expensive. And if you went to Thyatira, the people there they were really experienced about this manufacture of purple dye, and they would take it from the juice of a madder root. Madder. You know, that's not like the southern way of saying tomato, right? A madder. No, a madder root is actually a plant. That's funny, right? So, and there, it's in, you know, they used it to dye carpet at the end of the 19th century, but she came from Philippi to Philippi as a dealer, a trader in that dye, and there was another way that they made purple garments and that purple dye, and it was it was the secretion of a shellfish, a mollusk that lives in part of the Mediterranean Sea, and it took about 8,000 mollusks to produce 1 gram of purple dye. I mean, it was very, very expensive. Each mollusk, they said, had 1 drop of what you needed to create that purple dye. So purple is worn by emperors and by private citizens. It's a status symbol. It's expensive. Based on all of that, you would think that Lydia, being a seller of purple, so she's selling expensive luxury textiles dyed purple, and the wealthy and the elite would wear those purple garments. I mean, again, being very, 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 very costly. So the purple made of the mollusk was a little more purple than the purple that was made from the madder plant. It was called it had a name. I think it was called turkey red, which is appropriate. But she deals with this purple. Maybe she had purple from both sources. Maybe she knew how to create it from both sources. I'm not sure if she's in the process of creating the purple or if she's in the process of the dyeing. Doesn't seem to be that as much. It seems that she's just a seller of those really expensive garments. And so the women in Macedonia, they're noted for their independence. They have a certain amount of independence under Jewish law. And because of that, let's check in the chat box there. Because of that, some of them were very, very reputable, very, very wealthy businesswomen. And you see that with Lydia reflected a couple of ways, I think. One, that it's mentioned that she's a dealer of purple cloth. I mean, that in itself being mentioned means that, she's a businesswoman and probably a very successful one and probably a very wealthy one. She also has a house that's big enough, we're going to see in a minute, that she invites them to stay in her house. And not only does she invite them to stay in their house, but later in the chapter we found out that the church is at her house. So she probably has a very large house that's able to accommodate all of that. She has members of her household, which probably would include slaves as well in the Bible times. So, when Paul and Silas come out of prison at the end of the chapter, it says that they were going to go to Lydia's house where they met with the brothers and encouraged them. So she's a successful businesswoman. And Lydia, when she meets Paul, I'll go back to the text. When she and the members of her household were, the Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. When she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. So Lydia makes a commitment to Jesus. In fact, it's really interesting. Lydia is Paul's first convert in Europe. So, I mean, she has this really distinguished position in Paul's ministry. And it also says that she was a worshiper of God. And the wording there, she was probably a proselyte. She had one who maybe she had begun to follow the Jewish faith, not really knowing about Jesus yet, but following the Jewish faith. She was a worshiper of God. Maybe, I don't know if she learned that in Philippi. There wasn't a synagogue there, so maybe that's something that she learned and learned about God when she was back in Thyatira, where there was a synagogue in Thyatira. So when you think about Lydia and making this commitment to Jesus, at the first, we might think that was a really easy type thing to do. But at the time, it may not have been such a popular decision with those who were around her. You have this edict from Claudius that if it hasn't been put into force yet, it's just a little bit away from that. So there's this problem with that Claudius is having with the Jews in Rome, where he is going to expel them. Those in Philippi would have known about that and would have been taking the same position that Rome would have been taking. A decision to follow Jesus and a decision to follow a man who is considered to be a Jewish prophet and a message that was brought by a Jewish man to that city, it could have had some negative consequences on her business, actually. The text never says that, but I think it's very fair that we could say that could have some kind of negative implication on her business. You think about the people she is doing business with, how the population as a whole view the Jews. There are not very many in Philippi, evidently, because there's not a synagogue there yet. And it leads me to a question anyway. And the question is, can you make a commitment to Jesus if the decision might have negative consequences? It's okay, or maybe easier when we make a commitment to Jesus and everybody around us is making the same commitment, or that's kind of the common thing to do, or maybe it's the expected thing to do even, or if your family is followers of Jesus and you've grown up in a Christian family and you're making that commitment. But what if you're making that commitment in a scenario where it might have negative consequences? Would you still be able to make that commitment? It makes me think of a verse in the Bible where Jesus said, "What good is it for a man to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit his own soul?" And obviously the answer to that question is it's absolutely no good, is it? If you gain everything in the world, but you lose eternal life with Jesus because of your choices in this world, then those are not the wisest decisions. Those aren't the wisest choices. It reminds me of something I said Sunday during the sermon, which was, don't get to the end of this world and find out that you spent all of your life pursuing rubbish that wasn't important. Make sure that the thing that you pursue in this life is something that's really worth pursuing. And Lydia, she understood that and she knew that, and her heart was opened up to the message. She accepts the message of Jesus, and she and her household are baptized, which brings us to the next point, and that is Lydia was influential. Not only was Lydia baptized, but the members of her household were baptized. That could have been an extended family that came to the place of prayer. And if it was that, if there was extended family with Lydia who came to the place of prayer, it's probably because of her leadership. It's probably because of her example, because nobody else there is mentioned. Don't you think it's interesting in Acts chapter 16, you have Lydia, the members of the household, you have the Philippian jailer. Nobody is named by name except Lydia. She was a very influential lady, and so she brings members of her household to worship outside the city gate by the river, and it must have been just a group of women. There are no men that are listed there. It said in the text that we began to speak to the women who had gathered there. So those who were members of her household were probably women who had come with her, maybe her servants. But anyway, she professes her faith, she's baptized, and then the members of her household follow her example. And Luke doesn't seem to be very interested in telling us many details about Lydia's family or Lydia's household, except what Luke wants us to know is that Lydia's household is the core of the emerging church in Philippi. Lydia's house becomes the core. She's baptized. The members of her household are baptized. Doesn't say anything about anybody else being baptized until the Philippian jailer is baptized and his family is baptized, and they meet in Lydia's house. So she is the core of the beginning of the church in Philippi, which, it brings us to a really interesting point, and that is that the building blocks of a church are families and households. I mean, if you want to think about a church being built, and you want to think about it in terms of construction and structure, the building blocks are families and individuals. I mean, sometimes we think about buildings, and buildings are not the building blocks of churches. Sometimes they're important. Sometimes there's something that we need, but we could actually do without a building if we have families and individuals. And it's not programs. I mean, sometimes we can put all kind of programs together, and programs are important in churches. But the reason programs are important is because they relate to families and individuals. If you put a program into place and it doesn't affect anybody or help anybody or nurture anybody or build anybody up, then that program is a waste. Every program has to be designed to help families and individuals. Every structure of the church is designed to help families and individuals, because those are the building blocks. And when you get to Philippi and Luke is explaining to us the building blocks, what formulated the church in Philippi, it is Lydia and her household. So Lydia is a very influential person in the church in Philippi. I don't know. One mystery to me about Lydia is why she's not really mentioned in the book of Philippians. Some suggest that she is mentioned just with a different name, but we could do that as another study sometime. And Lydia's also she's a lady who exhibits hospitality and generosity. Lydia wants to express her gratitude to Paul and his companions, and so she urges them to stay with her. And again, that may not be as simple as it seems. I mean, if the edict of Claudius is known in Philippi at the time, and the Jews aren't being seen in a good light, in fact, they're even being asked to leave Rome, so maybe they're being asked to leave Philippi, and then you meet basically three Jewish men and one Gentile man who's on this missionary journey. And what you do is you invite them to come stay at your house. If that edict is actually already out there, I mean, what she's doing, we think, well, that's just a really simple thing to invite somebody to come stay at your house. But, the circumstances in Philippi, that might have been a very, very difficult thing for her to do. Later in the text, if you look in Acts chapter 16, remember Paul, what happens in Philippi is Paul, they're going to the place of prayer on 1 week, and they're met by this slave girl who has a spirit where she can predict the future. And she's following Paul and she's shouting, and Paul becomes troubled, and he turns around and he casts the spirit out of her. And the owners of the slave girl realize they can't make money off of her anymore. So they seize Paul and Silas and they drag them to the marketplace to face the authorities. And when they do that, they brought them before the magistrates and said, "These men are Jews and are throwing our city into an uproar by advocating customs unlawful for us Romans to accept or practice." Just the fact that they made that charge leads me to believe that this edict of Claudius is already in circulation, or at least it's almost in circulation. There's at least maybe some kind of ill feeling toward Jews, and Lydia invites them to come stay in her house. Now, we know from the edict that they were at least seemed to be rebellious in Rome because of this Christus, which most people think is a reference to Jesus Christ, to Christ. And I think they're probably right. And I think probably what was happening in Rome was this conflict between Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians, and well, not the Jews and Jewish and Gentile Christians. I stated that wrong. So the conflict is really between Jews and those Jews and Gentiles who had become Christians and followers of Jesus. So when you think about her inviting them into her house, she's inviting into her house not only Jewish men, but Jewish men who are proclaiming the messiahship of Jesus, that Jesus is the Christ, and they're strange men. So when she invites them in, I mean, that is a huge example of hospitality and generosity. And hospitality was so important in biblical times. I mean, it's important in our times, right? But it was very important in biblical times. There weren't a lot of Motel 8s and Holiday Inns and Red Roof Inn, wherever you stay. I mean, there aren't a lot of those there for you to stay in when you go visit a city. So especially if you were a believer, you were dependent upon the hospitality and the generosity of other believers who lived in that city. You see that reflected all through the Bible. So she invites them to come stay at her house. Now, sorry, I was on the wrong slide there. I thought you were there. So the last thing about Lydia that I think is really important, and I'm trying to finish up a little early tonight in case you want to watch the presidential debate. Lydia, I think she prioritized properly. I think she was wealthy. I think she was influential. But I think she used those things for God's purpose and God's glory. It's interesting to me when Paul writes the book of Philippians, which he writes the letter back to Philippi in Philippians chapter 4:15. He said, "You Philippians indeed know that in the early days of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you alone." And I personally think Lydia might have had a large part in that. I think she was a lady who, she was successful and she was influential, but she used those gifts and she used that position to help further the cause of Christ. And I think that's really important when you look at her. And then at the end of the chapter, when Paul is finally released from prison, and just quickly, I mean, that's a very interesting story. And remember what I told you about Philippi at the beginning? And it's considered to be a little Rome, so they couldn't be arrested except for really serious type things. They had all the rights of a Roman citizen. So they arrest Paul and Silas and put them in prison. And they even beat them. And remember, one of the things that's not supposed to happen is you're not supposed to be flogged because you're a Roman citizen. But they severely, the text says they severely flog Paul and Silas when they throw them into prison. And remember that, the rescue, they're praying and singing. There's the earthquake. The Philippian jailer is going to kill himself because he thought the prisoners have escaped. Paul stops him from doing that, tells them they're all here. The Philippian jailer becomes a believer in Jesus, becomes a Christian. He's baptized. It doesn't say he was baptized. Yes, he believed in the Lord Jesus, and then in verse 33, he's baptized. He washes their wounds. He cleans them up. So at daylight, the magistrates send messengers and say, release those men. And remember what Paul says, he said, that you can leave in peace. And Paul said, they beat us publicly without a trial, even though we are Roman citizens, and threw us into prison. And now they want to get rid of us quietly. No, let them come and escort us out. So when the officers report that back to the magistrates, they're alarmed. They have just done something they weren't supposed to do. And so they try to appease them to come and escort them from the city. But it says that when they came out of prison, they went to Lydia's house where they met with the brothers and encouraged them, and then they left. So Lydia, not only did she use her influence and probably her wealth for Christ's church in Philippi, she also, the church met probably in her house. So she is a very influential woman and kind of the core of what started the church in Philippi. So hope you learned something from that. Again, we're going to finish up early tonight. I don't see any questions. Let me check the Facebook if I can find no questions there. No questions there. No questions there. So I guess I explained that perfectly, right? Hey, you can join us on Sunday morning. We will be live streaming ClarksvilleHighwayChurch.com, GospelChariot.church. You can go to the Clarksville Highway Facebook page, Gospel Chariot Facebook page, YouTube channel. This Sunday, we will be really two questions. I only put one up there on this slide. Is must one be baptized to take communion? And the other question that tied into that, and I put both of them together, would a question about if you don't remember your baptism, your conversion, would you need to be rebaptized, or what are the reasons one might need to be rebaptized? So hopefully you can tune in for that. We will be doing that on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, we will be live streaming our Bible class. Start a new class this Sunday titled "The Gods Are Still Alive." Hope you can tune in for that. I'm really excited about that study. But the Gods Are Still Alive Bible class at 9, worship at 10 with must one be baptized to take communion. There's also, we've been doing a New Testament, last week was New Testament anyway. We've done a chronology class. We're in the process of doing the New Testament. Probably meet one more time, maybe twice, depending on how many questions there are. If you'd like to join that class, we meet on Tuesday at 10 o'clock. Go to gospelchariot.church. You will see this New Testament chronology graphic there. Just click on that, and you'll be able to register for that class. So, hope you enjoyed this evening. Hope you learned something about Lydia. If you want to read ahead, next week we will be talking about Lois. You can find, and Eunice, you can find them in First Timothy. And so if you'd like to read ahead for that, looking forward to that class, and hope you have a great evening. Going to check one more time, make sure there's no questions here. Don't see anything. Great. Thanks for tuning in, Linda. Glad you enjoyed the class. So, hey, good to see all of you guys, even though I know you're out there. So maybe I should just say, hey, it's good that you can see me. But have a good evening. And